Dracula made Transylvania famous, so why do people who actually live here kinda hate him?
Why?
Imagine growing up in a place where girls chase flower-crowned oxen through the village, where every other guy is named Yon and gets violently dipped into icy water for tradition, and lads in flower hats invite girls to dance. This is a real place. This is Transylvania. We were experimenting with religious freedom centuries before the rest of Europe even got the memo. We produced one of Europe's greatest military leaders, and we also, for some reason, have the largest underground Ferris wheel on Earth. And yet, the world knows us because of one guy, written by another guy who never set foot here. And somehow, for the last 120 years, Transylvania has been permanently branded as spooky vampire land associated with the mythology of Serbia? Hi, I'm Ella, a villager from Transylvania, and I make videos decoding the unhinged culture and history of Central and Eastern Europe. And today I'm finally addressing the elephant in the room, the topic people have been asking me to talk about for literal years: Dracula, and how he completely hijacked the way the world sees Transylvania. Ironically, a lot of people don't even realize Transylvania is a real place. I mean, once I told someone where I'm from, and they laughed and said, yeah, right, that I'm from Narnia. And by the end of this video, you will understand why Dracula feels less like cultural representation and more like cultural theft, because somehow in this story, we, the Romanians, are not the ones stealing. So without further ado, let's dissect this topic. Before we get into how Dracula did PR damage to Transylvania, we need to consider the vibes in Britain at the time the book was written. Because Victorian England was not okay. Industrialization was popping off, cities were overcrowded, disease was everywhere, and people were obsessed with death. They had elaborate mourning rituals, gothic aesthetics, true crime entertainment, and people would go on leisure walks in cemeteries. Oh no, who would do that? In the middle of all this, we have an Irish business manager named Abraham Stoker living in London, going to the British Museum reading room to brainstorm spooky thoughts after work. And during a vacation in Whitby, a port town in England that has a looming abbey, a graveyard overlooking the sea, a storm-battered harbour and brooding atmosphere, Stoker encounters a name in a history book of the local library: Dracula. There's an interesting theory about how he might have stumbled onto this name. Basically, there was a Transylvanian noblewoman called Claudine Redei, and somewhere in her extended family line, a relative married into a line that was supposedly descended from Vlad II's illegitimate son, Vlad the Monk, who was Vlad the Impaler's half-brother. Take a shot every time I mention someone called Vlad. Now, Claudine's granddaughter was Mary of Teck, who married Queen Victoria's grandson, Prince George, just a few years before Dracula was published, which means that King Charles is related to Dracula. With all that context, he takes Whitby's vibes, England's anxieties, Victorian fear of the foreigner, and projects onto a place he has never visited. So we get the story of a creepy foreign man who moves to London, panics the empire, and gets yeeted back to Eastern Europe by a group of Western lads. The book attempts to capture Transylvania's ethnic diversity, a topic that I'm way too familiar with, considering that I'm part Hungarian, part Romanian, with some questionable Saxon roots, and I grew up in a village with many Roma people in it. So yeah, this region has always been a cultural mix, but that deserves its own video. Where things get interesting is how he describes these groups. Like many late 19th century writers, Stoker kinda leaned into nationalist mythology, but let's say some of these descriptions aged like milk left on the London tube during the rare British summer day. According to Stoker, four main groups live here. First, the Transylvanian Saxons, a Germanic group who settled here in the Middle Ages. Next come the Magyars, meaning Hungarians. Then we have the Valachs, meaning Romanians, whom Stoker describes as descendants of the ancient Dacians. And finally, the Székelys, a Hungarian-speaking ethnic group whom Stoker calls the direct descendants of Attila the Hun. Now, I invite the old-school history fanboys, the genealogy nerds, and linguistics enjoyers to battle it out in the comments like you usually do. Stoker also mentions other ethnic groups. For example, he calls Slovaks barbarians with large hats, which is such a specific insult that I almost respect it. Then we get the Romanis, not to be confused with Romanians, and Stoker portrays them as Dracula's primitive servants operating sitting on the edge of society, which reflects Victorian attitudes towards certain groups. Now the fun part is that Dracula actually tells us his ethnicity, and he claims he is Sekai. And the most Sekai thing Dracula does is launch into a speech about how his people are superior, mixing Central European history with vague references to Norse mythology, similarly to how many ultranationalist politicians describe their ancestors across Eastern Europe even today.
Noi suntem vlahi din Valhalla.
So we have a book written by an Irishman, kinda set in Hungary, about a Sekai count inspired by a historical figure from Wallachia, filtered through British imperial anxiety. Step away, Pitbull, we found the original Mr. Worldwide here. Lastly, the book is dripping with some questionable undertones. Transylvania isn't portrayed as a real place, it's an armchair constructed Eastern Europe, amalgamated from Victorian fears about the East, the foreigner, degeneration and invasion. And the book was published in the right place, the right time, and even the right color. You see, in Victorian England, sensational literature was often published with yellow covers, which were the clickbait thumbnails of the 19th century, often sold at train stations promising scandalous topics that people could casually flip through on their commute. And this was the right format, capitalizing on existing anxieties. Personally, I don't get the hype. To me, the book feels kinda cringe, but it shaped decades of literature, cinema, and pop culture. Then came the films, which is why most foreigners have a completely wrong idea of what a Romanian accent sounds like. Iconic Hungarian-American actor Bela Lugosi canonized Dracula with his heavy Hungarian accent.
I hope you will like it.
Missing the soft R's and the melodic flow that actual Romanian speakers have.
This is reality.
And we should also clear up one small detail. During the lifetime of both Vlad Tepes and Bram Stoker, Transylvania was under Hungarian rule, not Romanian. And due to the fact that Transylvania is part of Romania today, many foreigners think that Romanians sound like Lugosi. But hey, don't use my accent as reference either. I constantly have to switch between 3 or 4 languages every day, so now I sound weird in all of them. This association deepened thanks to the people who are to blame for everything that's wrong with Romania, the communists. During the 70s, the Communist Party courted Western tourism and rebranded one of Transylvania's coolest historical landmarks as Dracula's Castle, which is unrelated to Vlad the Impaler. And that's how Transylvania became synonymous with the folklore of another land, the ruler of another land, written by a man from another land. And the irony is that the historical reality of Vlad the Impaler and the folklore and history of Transylvania are far richer than anything a gothic horror fantasy could depict. So let's turn to that. Although Bram Stoker never said Dracula was Vlad Tepes fanfiction, the name gives it away. So what does Dracula actually mean? Let's break it down, channeling Romanian historian Iago Juvara. In the early 15th century, Wallachia was having a succession dispute. Enter Sigismund of Luxembourg, the ginger bastard from KCD, whom I lovingly refer to as Foxy Luxy.
Anything else?
With his help, the illegitimate son of Wallachia's former voivode, Vlad Dracul, ascends. Although in modern Romanian, Dracul means the devil, in this context it comes from the word dragon, because Foxy Luxy knighted him into the Order of the Dragon, which was an elite Hungarian-Polish boys club serving him. Vlad II's sons inherited the nickname, so Dracula means son of the dragon. Vlad Sr. had 5 kids, and Vlad Jr. became the protagonist of Ottoman Trauma. The baby mama, well, contested. Most sources indicate Princess Ipraxia of Moldavia, but Hungarian ultranationalists will claim that she was a Sekai noblewoman, because everyone was Sekai, even Jesus. Although Dracula's family was from Wallachia, at that time Vlad Sr. was hanging out under Foxy Luxy's protection, so Vlad Jr. was in fact born in Transylvania, in Salzburg or Sighișoara, a Saxon city you should absolutely visit. The house he was supposedly born in has since been turned into a restaurant, although the evidence that he was actually born in that exact building is, let's say, questionable. When he snagged the Wallachian throne, he was fully in his Christian ruler, Team West, Hungary's ride or die era. Enter my man, John Hunyadi, Transylvanian commander of disputed ethnic background that I will not discuss because I enjoy being alive. He ruled Hungary as regent during Foxy Luxy's grandson's reign. Meanwhile, the Ottomans were doing insane shit in the Balkans. Like, no hate to my Turkish homies, but your ancestors, brah. They were taking children, sending girls to harems, forcing boys to become janissaries, holding hostages, demanding yearly tribute, using forced labor, executions, slavery, so locals were rightfully pissed. And Hunyadi, managed to shoo them away. Then came the big battle at Varna between Hungarians and the Ottomans, which fell apart after Faxilax's grandson made an oopsie, so Vlad Sr. was no longer vibing with Hunyadi. Then he did the most Romanian geopolitical move imaginable. He switched group chats to the Turks.
That fucking turncoat!
Now, Romania pulled this move twice in the 20th century, that's how Transylvania was snatched, but in the 1400s, Hunyadi was not amused and removed Vlad from the equation. Meanwhile, the Ottomans took Vlad Sr.'s sons, Radu and Vlad Jr. as political hostages, and this is where Vlad Jr. developed his anti-Turk rage arc. Now, Radu, he got Ottoman pilled, which is why the internet calls him Dracula's gay Muslim brother nowadays. When Vlad Jr. comes back to Wallachia, there's another succession crisis, and eventually he ends up under the wings of Hunyadi, who helps him secure the throne. And this is where he unlocks his infamous nickname. He secured his rule by invading boyars, which according to Juvara's book was a disturbingly common method of execution in Turkic and Germanic lands, even occasionally employed by Transylvanian Saxons. And that's where the name Tipish comes from. Tsiapa means stake. With Wallachia trapped between two empires, Vlad Jr. had to play both sides for a while before finally going firmly anti-Ottoman. Meanwhile, Hunyadi became a European war hero after winning the Battle of Belgrade, a victory Hungarians still honor by ringing church bells at noon. Then he got taken out by the only thing that could defeat him, the plague. Enter his son, my historical crush, Matthias Corvinus, the king of Hungary and Croatia, who began collecting titles like Pokemon cards, including King of Bohemia and Archduke of Austria. Under Matthias, things prospered by 15th century standards, mainly due to his trade deals and support for the merchant class, which is why he became idolized in Hungarian folklore. Now back to Vlad III. With the boyar kebab story, you understand why people see him as a madman, so why do history nerds and ultranationalists see him differently? That comes from his military strategies, which I like to call the reverse Stalin. You see, unlike Stalin and many 20th century leaders who threw bodies at problems and sacrificed their own people as cannon fodder, Vlad employed psychological warfare to neutralize his enemies before direct combat was even necessary, minimizing losses on his own side. He did sabotage missions, creating fear, chaos, and misery by manufacturing floods, poisoning wells, launching night raids in disguise, and making Ottomans attack each other in confusion. He documented all this in letters to Matthias, which are a fascinating read. Now, some sources even claim that he deployed infected agents into Ottoman camps to spread disease. Supporters argue these methods were justified, considering he was targeting an empire that enslaved and slaughtered locals. And the problem is, war is costly. Armies, mercenaries, fortifications don't run on vibes, so Vlad needed money, and he boosted trade, especially with Transylvanian Saxon merchants seeking better revenue. But the Saxons didn't follow his new rules, so he did what he did the best. He impaled them. Then he crossed the Carpathians to attack Saxon settlements, slaughtering locals.
And not just the men, but the women. And the children, too.
Then the Ottomans escalated the conflict and Vlad was overmatched, writing to my boy Matthias, "Hey, if Wallachia falls, you know you guys will be next." So the Ottomans rolled up to Kilia with a fleet and the Hungarian kingdom comes and delivers some help to Vlad, but a new character enters the chat. The ruler of the third region of Romania, Stefan of Moldavia, aka Stephen the Great. You see, Kilia was prime real estate for Central European trade, and since Stephen was in a toxic situationship with Poland, who did not want the Turks nor the Hungarians to get their hands on the port, Moldavia inserted itself. While the girls were fighting, the Turks slipped in. Luckily, Vlad had already evacuated the place beforehand, so there were no people, no food, no cattle, just a dry, brutal summer, and the only thing getting cooked were the Ottomans. After a spy scopes out the Ottoman camp, hosting thousands of soldiers, Vlad rose up at night with a few hundred lads, armed with smoky torches to cause chaos. And it almost worked, but things went south and they had to retreat. The Ottomans pushed forward until they walked into a forest of impaled people. So they knocked out. But they dropped off Vlad's gay Muslim brother, Radu the Handsome, yes, that's his official historical nickname, to diplomatically replace Vlad. Now more drama came when Vlad hopped over to Transylvania to hang out with my boy, and although he had married into Matthias's family, making them official allies, Matthias captured Tsipish. Why? Debated. Some say revenge for the slaughtered Saxons, and let's be real, our Germanic brothers were basically carrying the Transylvanian economy, just like German clients are filling the pockets of our software engineers today. Others say Matthias intercepted a dubious letter claiming Vlad was about to switch group chats like his dad. Either way, Vlad spent 12 years in captivity. Now, some legends claim he was locked in a dungeon, impaling rats to pass his time, but that's cap. I mean, this famous portrait of him was painted while he was in captivity. Just look at how he's dressed. He also had several children with his Hungarian belly during that time and hung out with a papal legate. Legend says whenever Matthias had to deal with Turkish messengers or diplomats, he would keep Vlad nearby to intimidate them. And after 12 years, Vlad's prison era is over and the main character arc resumes. He's back on the battlefield kicking Ottoman ass with more shenanigans, disguises, tricks, chaos, and of course, impaling. Eventually, he reclaimed the title of Voivode of Wallachia, but not for long. Soon after, his story ends, somewhat mysteriously. Some sources say his Turkish-backed rival, Basarab the Old, killed him, others claim he died in battle. Even his final resting place is still debated. All in all, Vlad was one of the most fascinating figures in European history, living in the messiest era of Wallachia, while Transylvania was also run by some absolute mad lads. So yeah, many resent how the world reduces him to evil vampire man, because the real history is cooler than this dumbass book. And ironically, not only Vlad was not Transylvanian, vampires aren't either. The origins of vampire folklore are heavily debated, like everything else in the Balkans, but one thing is crystal clear: Transylvania did not invent vampires. Now, every culture has some flavor of undead life force reigning creature. Latin America, Asia, absolutely stacked. But in Europe, the earliest documented vampire cases come from the South Slavic regions, mainly Serbia and Croatia. Even the word vampire itself comes from the Serbian vampir, which traces back to the old Church Slavonic upir that linguists link to a Proto-Slavic root associated with flying or drinking. Versions of the same word show up across Slavic languages like the Polish upior and the Ukrainian upir, both referring to vampiric undead creatures. The word spread westward along with the stories from the Serbian vampire panics that terrified Central Europe in the 18th century. Now, according to folklore, after someone dies, there's a 40-day window where an evil spirit can enter the body. And if that happens, congrats, now you have a night-roaming, blood-sucking, livestock-strangling vampire. Also, the corpse supposedly turns black before that happens, and the butterfly can emerge from a grave as the vampire's apparition. Researchers argue that these vampire stories weren't random. They reflected social fears like sudden death, disease, moral panic, and even sexual anxiety. And basically, people were dying left and right, and the 17th, 18th century people needed to rationalize it, so they invented vampires. Tanja Jurkovic, a writer who published some interesting papers on Balkan media and fiction, wrote about this topic in a study titled Balkan Vampire Myth, Urban Legends, or a Publicity Tool, in which she mentions infamous real-life cases of suspected vampires. For example, in 18th century Serbia, during the Austro-Turkish Wars, officials excavated an entire cemetery because villagers insisted that vampires were real there. And officials opened graves, found bodies that hadn't decomposed the way they expected, and said, well, that confirms it. So they literally decapitated the bodies, burned them, and threw the ashes into the river. There's also the story of Petar Blagojevic, a Serbian peasant who returned from the grave and showed up at night at villagers' bedsides to strangle them. Officials exhumed him 2 months later and reported that the body looked fresh with blood at the mouth. So, stake in the heart, burn, problem solved. Hey, maybe Vlad Tepes was also just trying to prevent reanimation. Even earlier, in 17th century Istria, there was Jure Grando. According to local legend, 16 years after his death, he returned as a strigon, a kind of undead vampire-like creature. He supposedly went around knocking on doors at night, and if he knocked on your door, someone in that house would soon die. He paid regular visits to his widow, forcing her to continue fulfilling her marital duties, and eventually villagers decapitated him. Just an average day in the Balkans. The most famous fictional vampire from Balkan storytelling is Sava Savanovic, an ugly, unmarried old man obsessed with a younger woman who kept rejecting him. So he shot her. Villagers beat him to death and they buried him outside consecrated ground because the murderer. But shortly after, he's wandering around at night, killing people. In his book, Juvara also points out that vampires do not exist in Romanian mythology or folklore, nor in Wallachian, Transylvanian, or Moldavian ones. I love how in Romanian folklore terms he describes Dracula as a ghost-like creature called Stafie who turns people into strigoi. And this is where people mix up things and say that vampires are from Romanian mythology because they mistake them for the strigoi. But those were described as the undead return of the people who lived sinful lives, died violently, or were the seventh child of the same sex in a family. They could turn into animals, become invisible, bring drought, ruin crops, mess with livestock, and just kill the vibes all around. And they were especially active on St. Andrew's Night, which is kind of like the Romanian Halloween, when malevolence roams and people need to protect themselves by hanging garlic on doors. And to neutralize a suspected strigoi, villagers would impale the corpse's heart, bury them face down, and get rid of them. So the bottom line is, Transylvania did not invent vampires, the South Slavs did the heavy lifting. And the hysteria spread westward, eventually it reached one Irish bureaucrat, Bram Stoker, and then we got Dracula and Twilight, and I personally developed vampire fatigue. But all that aside, I have another beef with this book, and that stems from how it depicts certain regions, and I'm not the only one feeling this way. Stoker didn't invent Dracula to represent Transylvania. He invented him to absorb Britain's own paranoia as a convenient master reflecting Victorian fears. And it worked. The book rewired pop culture, it spawned films, stereotypes, tourist traps, and eventually an entire academic micro-industry dedicated to unpacking what this one fictional character did. And they are called Draculagists. Wait, Draculagists?
Can't remember the name, huh? A senior moment, perhaps.
Oh, Draculists. One theme reoccurs in Draculist research, and that is xenophobia. Just to be clear, I don't think Stoker intentionally included these themes to be hateful. His work mostly reflects the mindset of the era and its anxieties about foreigners. Among many scholars, Sybil Baumbach addresses this directly in her paper Bram Stoker's Dracula, a foreign threat to the British Empire. Because this book isn't just spooky castle vibes, it's Victorian panic literature. And at the time, Britain was spiraling due to imperial competition, political tension, fear about women straying from traditional gender roles, and anxiety that the empire might decline or collapse. Darwin's theory of evolution also inspired some, let's just say, questionable interpretations. Other scholars twisted it into degeneration theory, the idea that the civilization could actually regress. So suddenly the empire that had colonized half of the world became terrified of the possibility of being colonized back by people it considered less than. Enter Dracula, a symbol of both external and internal threats to British society. As an undead being, he survives for centuries, feeding on the blood of the living, preying on the bodies and souls of men. And he can recruit ordinary people and turn them into foul things of the night like him. As a foreign invader, he represents an outside threat, but also an internal corruption. His invasion begins intellectually. He studies English law, politics, culture, language, and he masters English to blend in. So knowledge first, violence second. He buys property across London, spinning a web over the empire's heart. And Stoker leans heavily into degeneration theory, coding Dracula as animalistic, primitive, and the archetype of born criminal. And although he's cunning enough to study law, he is still somehow dismissed as having a child's brain, a selfish, stunted mind, contrasted with the superior British man's brain. And who does he target?
Females!
This main threat isn't just psychological violence, it's women stepping outside their prescribed roles. He seduces them, transforms them, pulls them out of their proper marriage and motherhood lanes, which in Victorian England was arguably more horrifying than blood. Jago Juvara also highlights this aspect in the book, describing Dracula as alarmism about a foreigner who seeks to destroy Great Britain, loosely based on a late medieval tyrant. And its satisfying ending fueled the story's popularity. The hero saved the British Empire by taking a geographically questionable trip to eliminate Dracula in his own homeland. And if you don't see why that might make people uneasy, imagine me writing a novel about a British man traveling abroad to abuse women and children. Oh wait, that would be the biography of Andrew Tate. So imagine your homeland being reduced to one fictional character written by someone who never visited, then watching the world perpetuate it for 120 years like it wasn't even a real place. And honestly, the main issue isn't even the book itself. The tourist industry turned it into a bigger problem. Dracula fatigue is real, y'all. Like, if I had one Leo every time someone found out I'm from Transylvania and immediately dropped the vampire joke, I could personally buy Bran Castle. So I got curious and I asked my Romanian and Transylvanian viewers, how do we feel about Dracula, the book, the brand, the tourism, and the entire vampire cinematic universe attached to our backyard? And the answers were mixed, spicy, and emotionally layered. Some of you are tired, exhausted, drained, because for a lot of foreigners, Dracula is the only thing they know about Transylvania, and some don't even realize that it's part of Romania, it's just that spooky place. Others said, okay, but at least we are known for something, which is a silver lining. And there are, of course, locals who genuinely do not care, haven't read the book, don't think about Dracula, and only hear about it from tourists. But the majority have a love and hate relationship with it. It feels like a foreign invention that isn't even rooted in local culture, because it isn't, but at the same time it's a powerful tourism brand that brings money. And in this economy, you kinda take what you can get. I need to publicly acknowledge Sofia, my longtime supporter, the goat or the deer, who sent me a gigarant highlighting that the book, the vampire aesthetics, and the gothic vibes are fine, but the issue is the forced, constant linking of Dracula with Vlad Tepes and this weird, artificial blend of fiction and history when their actual connection is minimal. The marketing of Bran Castle and the house in Sighișoara as Dracula's home is also historically inappropriate at best and misleading at worst. So let's unpack all this. In contemporary Romania, tourism boards and marketers use Dracula imagery very strategically, and it absolutely plays into Western expectations. And to tie into something called dark tourism. It's a real phenomenon where people are drawn to places associated with tragedy, death, morbid history, from battlefields to prisons to disaster sites. And Transylvania isn't the only place doing dark vampiristic tourism. Serbs and Croats turned sites linked to Sava Savanovic and Jure Grando into vampire-related destinations too. So who is exactly at fault for Dracula becoming so aggressively attached to Transylvania? The communists! Let's talk about Bran Castle, the place everyone thinks Dracula personally interior designed. Bran sits between the Buceci and Piatra Craiului mountains, and in the 1200s, King Andrew II of Hungary gave the land to the Teutonic Knights to defend the region. They built a fortress, then they got kicked out, and a century later King Louis I told the Saxons to build a proper stone castle there. By the late 14th century, Bran stood as a fortress and customs checkpoint, growing in military and administrative importance. Now, here's the only real Vlad Tepes connection to it. When he attacked Brașov during the conflict with the Saxons, Vlad probably passed by Bran, but there's no historical evidence suggesting that he ever even stepped inside the castle. Fun fact, the fortress historians actually link to Vlad Tepes is the Poenari Castle, perched high on a cliff in the south, originally built in the 13th century, and historians say that Vlad discovered its ruins while hunting and rebuilt it into a stronghold. When nobles refused to fund the constructions, he forced them into labor in brutal conditions. Regarding the Bran Castle, over the centuries, the castle survived wars, sieges, damage, and neglect, and then came the Treaty of Trianon. Hungary said Transylvania joins Romania. Brașov gifts Bran Castle to Queen Marie, who restores it into a royal residence. Then, during World War II, Princess Ileana turns it into a military hospital. And later, the communists confiscate it and force the royal family into exile. Now, I found an old Bună-ziua Brașov article titled Dracula was raised by Ceausescu, which discusses the claims of historian Nicolae Pepene, director of the Brașov County Museum of History and author of the documentary Dracula Travel Agent, about how the association between Dracula and Bran Castle was created during the communist period. So enter Ceausescu, who wanted Western tourist money. And Bran looked the part. It was dramatic, medieval, similar to the castle described in Dracula, and crucially it was close to Bucharest, so it was accessible. So the regime branded Dracula's castle. Tourism grows because Romania is cheaper than Bulgaria or Turkey at the time, and alongside Dracula, the regime also promotes fortified churches, painted monasteries, and seaside resorts. Now, in his book, historian Iago Juvara also openly criticized our governance for leaning into Dracula mania, turning a place unrelated to Tepes into Dracula's Disneyland. And I agree. I've been to Bran a few times, it's honestly beautiful, but I physically cringed at the vampire merch and the Dracula-related exhibitions. So if you visit it, please try to see it as what it is: a stunning medieval Saxon stronghold, a royal residence, and a wartime refuge. Don't let the Camera rebrand erase that. Transylvania is too layered, too beautiful, and too culturally dense to be flattened into a foreign vampire fantasy. I mean, have you seen Corvin Castle or Sigishora? There's also Brasov, Oradea, Sibiu, and my beloved Cluj-Napoca, cities where Saxon, Austro-Hungarian, and Imperial Romanian architecture layer over each other. The rural architecture in Birtan or Rimetea is also unreal, and my controversial opinion is that I love the Gabor Roma palaces. Let people be maximalist in peace. Talking about maximalism, the folk culture in some regions is on another level, especially in Kalotaszeg or Szarakalate, and traditions like chasing flower-crowned oxen, harvest rituals, masked Saxon carnivals, and baiting of yawns or the lads' invitations are straight up cinematic. The hiking trails, the underground amusement park, the Astra Open Air Museum, everything is beautiful, so maybe it's time we start looking at Transylvania as the place it actually is and not as a fantasy a foreigner created. If you enjoyed this video, comment, thanks for the Kurtush to confuse the new viewers. Shout out to my channel members, especially the Papanash supporters. Sophia, thanks for tuning in and have a nice day.